All right, so we should be live now. Well, I should be live. This is just me. Um, so let's see. In the live chat of my coming in, says that we've got 0 viewers. There's 1 viewer. All right, so um, seems like everybody's coming into the live chat, and even though it's telling me I still have 0 viewers, and then it refreshes. Okay, there we go. All right, so I just hit 75,000 subscribers this well, it was actually towards the beginning of November, but I've been in the middle of school and it has been quite a trying semester. Um, so I figured I'd do a live stream because I'm finally back working like actually on the channel. You see, during the semester, I normally don't make episodes. I actually make all of these episodes like during the summer and all that, and then just have a bunch of them ready to go over the semester. Um, and now it just ended this week, and so we're finally and I'm finally done grading as of yesterday. So finally I'm starting to put together episodes again. And I figured I'd come on and talk about it. Um, so the um, of course, I'll also be answering questions. So if anybody in the chat wants to ask me a question or anything, be sure to put the like at Cynical Historian in front of it, so that I can catch it more easily. Um, so in other news, the last live chat was November 11th. And we were doing it about the centennial of Armistice Day, and I said that I'd be donating all the proceeds from that live stream to charity, and it only came out to $30. But I will be donating $30 to the charity listed in that description. Um, Unfortunately, it was a very small amount. YouTube takes about 30% of all super chats or anything along those lines. It's kind of annoying. Um, so I think we've got our first question here. So Tahu Tim asks, "Do you have any?" Well, of course I do. Do you have any hobbies? I mean, like, this is a hobby basically. The problem is when you're doing as much history work as I'm doing, um, like finding time to just watch television is actually quite a task. I've actually learned how to read and watch at the same time. Like that's how much time goes into this. Um, and it's mostly reading that I have to do. But every once in a while I'll hop on and like do um some Rocket League or I know I'll be playing plenty of Smash when I get back home for the winter. Um, I'll be in Las Vegas from the 25th to the 8th or something like that. I'll be in Reno from the 5 days before that. Going to be doing a lot of traveling over the winter, of course. Just and I'm going to be moving as soon as I get back here to a new house. So yeah, being able to do fun stuff is not exactly a thing that I get to do a lot of. Besides doing this is fun for me at least. Um, but yeah, I do play some video games and whatnot. Um, Mostly Rocket League because it's the one thing I can just hop on and do real quick. Although over winter break I'll be doing some skiing, so there's that. So um, let's go on to the next question. Let's see here. Um, Yeah, and so Hunter DJ asks if I'm getting rid of the Lennon Beard. It's winter. Um, you know, as soon as the winter comes in, it um start growing it out. But the Lennon Beard will be back when it starts to warm up again. Um, Ultim Ultimer 1183 asks, you've mentioned your area of expertise is American violence. Did you plan to focus on that, or did it just turn out that way? Um, it's a good question, and uh, I th- I think it basically just kind of turned out that way. I initially was um the the crap. Lost my train of thought. Okay, so I started off studying American Small Wars as because I'm an Afghanistan vet. That is an American Small War. I did my capstone paper from undergrad on the American intervention into the Russian Civil War from the perspective of the British cabinet documents. Um, so I was just trying to find out like why it even happened, which the answer still eludes me. Um, but there's not a lot of room in academia for that kind of study. Nobody's hiring small wars historians. So when I got my master's, I kind of figured that out, and I instead started looking more and more at local history. But you know, I had to figure out how to blend my interest in American small wars and and local history, which Las Vegas and San Luis Obispo at that point, um, and those two combined to be American violence. So I did my master's thesis on on the Vigilance Committee in San Luis Obispo, um, really about um, a trend of violence. It was called Pacifying Paradise: Violence and Vigilantism in San Luis Obispo. Um, and so it's something that kind of was forced on me upon realization. I did not plan on being a historian of American violence, but it just kind of developed. And now I'm looking at violence in New Mexico between 1863 and 1912, specifically when Arizona got split off from New Mexico and when New Mexico became a state. So the post-war territorial period. So that's when you had a bunch of range wars, a lot of lynching, a series of assassinations. New Mexico was a really violent place, so I'm in a good place to study that. Um, so let's see here. Gad Yarev, I hope I'm saying that right. Says, do you find yourself focusing on American violence in southwestern America, and if so, why? Yeah, very much in the Southwest, and the reason why is I like to study where I live. Um, so I just I've always lived in the Southwest. I was born in San Luis Obispo. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. Um, and I now I'm dang it. I need to silence my phone. And now I am in New Mexico, which is often thought to be like the most southwestern state, even though California technically is. Um, but yeah, so the reason why I focus on the Southwest is basically because that's where I've lived. Um, it's a lot easier to go into archives when you just need to walk down the street to go to them. um, so 251 West 39 asks, can you do a piece on the historian Howard Zinn's views? Um, I'm not a fan of Howard Zinn, to be honest. So I don't know if I really want to do it. He's more just a popular figure. He's not like that influential. If I was going to pick a revisionist historian to focus on, it would probably be D. Brown, who wrote "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee." And I actually have a episode, um, mostly recorded, that will be looking at the HBO special on "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee." That was kind of the big kind of knockout blow to Frederick Jackson Turner, who kind of forms our American Orthodox historiography. He's the one who really defines American exceptionalism. Um, and with D. Brown just knocking him out of the park, um, that was a quite an upset in 1970. Um, led to the death of the Western genre, quite literally. Um, so I will be talking about that. But Howard Zinn is just kind of a labor historian who got really popular for his more pop history stuff, and it's not like he formed some sort of major change in historiography or anything. He's just popular. It's the same as like doing an episode on James McPherson or something. Like they're just popular authors, not um, particularly changing the historiography. Um, so let's see here. And remember to put the at the cynical historian in front of it so that I can see the questions. Let's see here. So um, Punk Shi or Punk Sai. I, we've been talking for a while, so at one point we were calling him Punk Gramsci. Um, asks, would you classify Molotov? Okay, and would you classify Molotov cocktails in the context of street protests as an effective anti-personnel weapon or an area denial weapon? uh, it can be used as both. that's, that's kind of random. Um, so let's see here. Alexandros uh, I've been talking to him for a while too, but I don't know how to say his last name, and I'm going to butcher it, so I'll just say Alexandros. Um, says all those McPherson references in the paper have me scared. uh, no worries, and I actually looked at his paper recently. So let's see here. Soda Boy 628 asks, "Who's your favorite president and why?" Um, I don't really have a favorite as in like he was the best president. You could argue Lincoln was just the right man at the right time. Um like managed to do a lot of good for the country in its worst possible time. Um but at the same time, I mean, he was a tyrant. He really was. He jailed people for speaking of secession. He freaking was basically promoting massacres of American Indians. The entire far west became a means of expansion, and he expanded the federal government more than like anyone before him. So it's like I would choose him, I think, but also I have a lot of qualms. And like it's the same thing with like I like Teddy Roosevelt just because he's a awesome character, But at the same time, when you look at his more imperialistic side, and suddenly you see the whole his whole idea of the stringent life becomes not a good thing. He promoted the Philippines, taking over the Philippines, and fiercely denied their ability to self-govern. Um, and he was vice president at the time, so his opinion mattered. Um, Unlike another person who happened to be at Princeton, who was also saying they couldn't govern themselves. Um, so let's see here. Next is Rorschach. Okay. Rorschach asks, "Do you have plans on touching the causes that started the Comanche War, Lakota War, and Snake War?" Um, I've actually done um, a thing on Jabsy's channel on the Sioux Wars, and I mentioned earlier that Wounded Knee thing. I'm going to just play that in the reality section of the video. Um, there's some things that I wish I could go back and correct, which is why I'm going to play it in mine. But it's pretty good. Um, the in terms of Comanche War, there isn't a Comanche War. It's just kind of Comanche Wars. Um, and I touched a little bit on that in what is America's longest war. Um, and yeah, that one's a little uh not anything you can do specifically. I'm a big fan of Pekka Haimalainen's book Comanche Empire. He touches on it. Well, he doesn't just touch on it; it's the entirety of the book. So I highly recommend that book. Although there's there's other things, there's other books to go after, articles that like War of a Thousand Deserts by Delay. Uh, Delay really explores the nastier side of what Hamalainen calls a Comanche Empire. So it's yeah, there's a lot to cover there. And I'm not really going to focus on any particular Indian war because one, that's not really my subject, and two, um, if you just talk about it as a singular thing, like a singular war, you're kind of missing the larger context. Um, so let's see here. Um, let's see here. So J Crest 23 asks, as a history major who struggles with making solid arguments for his undergrad paper, do you have any advice? So, one of the it is a weird thing that I see a lot when I'm grading papers is that a lot of undergrads basically refuse to make an argument. Um, they they want to just like tell the story of something, but then it's like, okay, but what are you trying to say? You can't just rattle off a bunch of facts and not string them together to form some sort of argument. So oftentimes it's it's dictated by the story that you're telling, right? I mean, all stories have an argument implied in them, right? There's always a moral to the story. So the trick there is for you to figure out what is the moral of the story that you are telling. Um, you know, why why are you talking about this? Um, when you have that, then you've got your thesis. Then you've just got to build it all around that, build the story all around that one thesis. But be sure to make it more narrative heavy. I would vastly prefer. I can't speak for your professors, um, but when I'm grading papers, the ones that are more narrative heavy tend to do better. And like I really like it when I see people who do mostly narrative and then kind of like bring it all together in the conclusion and really lay it out like how all of that means what they were trying to say. So I hope that helps. There's a lot to making an argument, of course. You know, you have to know the logic of what you're saying. So um yeah, just try to think about it as an argument, but also that like there's a moral to the story. Um so and chat is going quickly. Let's see here. Uh Kane Yo-Yo um asks, do you take into account time period when picking a favorite president? For example, I feel like I can say I love what Washington did for the country without agreeing on slavery. I mean, yes, of course. But also I don't really have a favorite president. You know, I can point to ones that are better than others, but I can't say what's the best. Actually, you know what? Let's just say I like Garfield. He wasn't there for very long, and what he did while he was there was great. that's that's a great president right there. And like Calvin Coolidge, who just did nothing, which is exactly what I want out of a president. So, but in terms of taking account time period, that's actually a much. It's not just about presidents. It's about um uh any historical figure, right? We shouldn't be applying our morals to the past. Um, it's it's difficult not to. In fact, the last couple episodes have been basically talking about how the difficulties of not doing that. You know, sympathizing with the devil and freaking, you know, trying to like have experience in something that but like how that affects your scholarship in that. Um, so you bring up Washington, who you know is often thought of like as this kind of golden boy. You know, like he served exactly 2 terms, did what he needed to do, and got out, and set an example for all for everyone else. Except for there's a reason why the what would eventually become the Democrats, but we normally call them Jeffersonian Republicans, um, or sometimes Democratic Republicans, um, started forming in opposition to what Washington represented. Washington was a fierce federalist, um, and he also was responsible for what was called the Jay Treaty, this incredibly divisive treaty that we basically gave a bunch of concessions to the British to make them stop freaking, you know, not acknowledging us still. Um, and the Jay Treaty didn't even really work. Um, but it angered the French. It angered Americans who thought that we should be more closely allied with France. Um, and all of this, Washington like couldn't handle. He had no idea how to deal with like international politics. Um, and it really showed. So even in his final thing, a lot of people talk about like in his final speech saying like, "Don't get into entangling alliances." But there's a way of looking at that as just like we shouldn't have to, where he's just saying like we shouldn't have to deal with this kind of stuff. It's too hard to deal with. I don't want to deal with it. So don't get into entangling alliances. You know, it could actually be seen as a form of incompetency. Um, so even when so a lot of the praise of Washington is actually more retroactive than seeing him as he was. Um, at least as he was seen by his peers. Um, so yeah, it's important to take into account differences in time frame, but it's also when you do that, you'd be surprised what the conclusions come to. Um, so I talked about that for quite a while. um, got quite a few questions. Let's see here. So, 251 West 39S, is the U.S. anarchy movement and the U.S. communist movements the same? No, um, not at all. The the communist movement in particular didn't really. It wasn't the I'm guessing you're referring more to the Communist Party there, um, which really didn't show up until about 1910, something like that. Whereas anarchism and communism, at least 20th century communism, are almost directly opposed to each other. Um, you know, there's a reason why the First International broke up, and it was basically that Bakunin and Marx didn't agree on anything. Um, so yeah, a lot of people will talk about the left as this like one solid block of lefties, but there's some pretty stark divisions on the left, um, even in the early 20th century. Let's see here. So, Grad Yarev says, is there too much focus on president by academia as much as in pop history, or rather a more nuanced look at the entire political scene? So you're talking about like, because I mean, even in this stream, there's been a bunch of people asking, what's your favorite president? Like, let's talk about this president. Let's talk about that, and not so much, what about Congress? And Wilson was complaining that Congress had too much power in his dissertation. So what I wouldn't say that there's too much focus on it in academia, um, but presidents offer a pretty easy narrative um, of change. I mean, after all, history is just change over time, stories. Um, the So you have discrete eras with the coming and going of each president or each party or whatever, and it you also can just say he did this, he did that, rather than having to explain the entire workings of the U.S. government with every policy. But also, there's a reason why we do that for um, any kind of military policy or kind of international interaction. It's also kind of what's mandated by the U.S. Constitution is that the president is ultimately the person responsible for any kind of international interaction. Um, there's a lot more complication to it. I know there's the whole way that treaties are ratified and everything, but um, you know, if the president sends out a minister to organize to go talk to a tribe and let's say like the various Cherokee treaties, right? That he sends out an Indian agent to um, negotiate a treaty, and yes, Congress has to ratify that treaty, but if they don't, then it's still up to the president to go and redo the treaty. Um, so the and luckily for the Cherokee, there were a lot of their treaties were never ratified, and some of them were like, well, they would have been a lot worse off if they were ratified. Um, but the um, it's it is a bit of a problem though, because it's a bit of an easy out. You can easily say the president did something when it's a lot more complicated than that. Um, but that's kind of all of history, right? Everything you ever say is going to be, there's a lot more complication to this, but I can't get into it now. Um, I constantly have to write that into scripts. um, so, Alexandros asks, what do you think of objectivists? You're gonna have there's a few different things. Oh, are you referring to objectivists as in people who think that history should be absolutely objective, kind of thing? Because if you are, um, there there's this common idea that history should be just told the way things were. But that's never been how history was told. Um, from the earliest days, from Herodotus onward, I think it's Lucian, um, another ancient historian, who wrote a book, or maybe just a pamphlet, that's just called "The Malice of Herodotus." Like, people were complaining of um of historians being too biased and manipulating the narrative and all that from literally the start of it. Um, Now, some people will point to things that like Ronca talked about. Ronca is basically the founder of professional history, um, and he was revolutionary in really emphasizing primary sources, because before that it was just kind of like parsing together what historians and other scholars had said. Um, but using primary sources changed the field forever. But the uh, the problem is people will talk about that as if it can be objective, and it can't. Um, Sources are biased. You have to be able to criticize primary sources, otherwise you're never going to be able to function. Um, but at the same time, you also have to know where your critical limits are, and it's a delicate balance. But so there's a really famous book called That Noble Dream. I don't remember. Is it Peter Novick? I think. Um, let's see. Uh, oh, I got it right. Yeah, Peter Novick. Um, and in it, it's actually subtitled "The Objectivity Question and the." Come on, Google. The Objectivity Question and the American History Profession. Um, Now, in in my school, we call that book "That Noble Doorstop." I don't recommend reading it unless you really want to try to get at this the way the objectivity question has changed over time. But he also has some serious problems in it where he's talking about like um, you know that certain historians believed in absolute objectivity when they've made very clear statements to the opposite. Um, so yeah, I don't think the profession has ever really thought of itself as being purely objective. I think the idea of scientific history is rather ludicrous. Um, but you'll find many people who think otherwise. Um, but that's you know the fact that there is such a disagreement kind of proves that it's a subjective question. um, So let's go on to let's see. Um, Gabriel Garcia asks, do you agree with the common point that Wilson's foreign policy is progressive? Personally, I think it's progressive in the sense that it progressed U.S. empire. Um, sure, yeah, that I don't like calling Wilson a progressive, because he had so many policies that were genuinely regressive. Um, but in terms of his foreign policy, the idea of humanitarian intervention, I mean, that is fairly. I don't like it, but you can label it as progressive. The idea that you can go into some foreign country, intervene on the behalf of democracy everywhere, and you know, help them to fight off communist invasions or something like that. That's Wilsonian thought through and through. That is Wilsonianism, um, which is an actual, which is kind of the predominant um, paradigm right now in international relations. So this idea that you can um, intervene and help people, but okay, sorry, the my computer freaked out on me for a second there. Um, is am I back? Okay, I'm back. Cool. That was weird. Um, the but anyways, so getting back on Wilsonianism, as seeing it as a progressive principle, it just kind of depends on what you think of as progressivism. Is progressivism a form of expanding the government for social policies? Then yeah, it's very much a progressive policy. Um, is it in terms of actual human progress? It is exactly the opposite. I, Vietnam wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Wilsonianism. But like that's the problem with infusing that kind of ideology, fighting for democracy. Um, but the the it just depends on that. But generally, yeah, it would be considered progressive. Um, let's see here. Whoop, please don't screw up on me again, computer. um, let's see here. Sir Reginald Meowington. um, what are your thoughts on the future of cyber warfare as technology progresses? Um, I mean, it's already happening. There are constant attacks between countries wielding basically cyber terrorism. The Chinese especially, um, attack our infrastructure all the time. Um, and then there's of course Russian bots affecting our elections. But at the same time, is it really that much different from information warfare of the 20th century, where you have the CIA trying to affect elections throughout the world. Um, you have spies uh, trying to gain access to vulnerable points in the USSR's infrastructure and things like that. So, is it different? Yeah, but is it completely different? No. Um, Also, we have a tendency to not realize the full weight of the change at hand until halfway through a major war. Like if we're going to fight a major war, we're going to be fighting the last war up until halfway through it. Because we don't really learn that fast, especially in the military. The military does not like to learn. Um, it is a juggernaut and hard to swerve in any direction. Um, Simal0215 asks, what about interventions to stop a genocide for? Okay, so this is referring back to the Wilsonian intervention kind of thing, the humanitarian interventions, which is his primary legacy. Um, the uh, the so like referring to like the Bosnian genocide or the Rwandan genocide or anything along those lines, is it okay to intervene? Well, the problem is, um, when you start intervening just because a genocide is happening, rather than trying to implement sanctions or any kind of non-war solution, um, the you get wrapped up in the genocide. So, for instance, in Rwanda, when when the UN finally did try to step in and do something, now the current Rwandan government has blamed the UN in helping the Hutus kill the Tutsis. It gets really complicated really quickly, especially if you don't go through the necessary steps prior to that. Need to try to sanction the place. I mean, look at what's happening in crap. I'm forgetting the name of the place. Used to be called Siam. Um, you have a genocide going on there right now, and nobody's trying to intervene militarily because you're going to get wrapped up in it. Um, we're not Team America World Police, and we shouldn't be. But that's what Wilson wanted. Um, so let's see here. Um, Hunter Deja says, again, giving Wilson his props. FDR was inspired by Wilsonianism, by the way, and he did his best to support the UK against Hitler before Pearl Harbor because of it. Yeah, that's kind of that's there was never a neutral every time people talk about like the failure of the America First movement in the 1930s and look how stupid these isolationists were. Well, they were being undermined the whole time. You had Lend-Lease, and then before it you had forgetting the name of it, but there was a program before Lend-Lease. Um, Progressively, the U.S. got more and more involved in World War II, even though it had not officially become involved. Um, so yeah, that's not neutrality. So it's not like the America First movement failed. It's because it never was working in the first place. Um, so next, Kane Yo-Yo asks, why do many Americans don't like the government assisting at all? Wasn't it the government that helped pave the road for roads? It's hard to read what you're saying. Basically, you're asking why are libertarians not wanting government interference? Well, it's not like um libertarians are against roads and that. That's an old and debunked way of thinking. It's not like a libertarian is and I'm talking proper libertarians like Gary Johnson, not freaking wackos like far right people. Um, but that was something that Gary Johnson, when he was running for election in 2016, people were saying like, well, if you don't like government, then obviously you don't like roads or NASA, and it's like that's not what they want to cut back. That's not the argument being had. Um, you know, now if you're referring to anarchists, that's another interesting thing, and and there's a lot of different ideas on it. But I'm not an anarchist, so at least anymore. I was a that was something I was back in high school, and then I grew out of it. So let's see here. Yerev asks, why did Americans have the tendency to make criminals into folk heroes, and why doesn't it happen today? Oh, it definitely happens today. um, so this is the social banditry myth, right? Um, well, social banditry still runs rampant. Now it's not like we have um, a lot of examples modern day, but that's also because America is just not as violent as it used to be. Um, you know, when we had people like Billy the Kid running around here, um, quite literally here in Albuquerque, um, the uh, the there was a lot of killing going on throughout the nation, and nowadays murder is far less rampant, so there's less criminals to glorify. Um, but we still have a problem with glorifying them. Think about the nasty individuals who glorify mass shooters, or try to say that they were, not actually that these people who are blamed for mass shooting. Oh, they weren't the actual mass shooters. It was the CIA or something like that. And so in that respect, they're basically saying that the mass shooter is a hero, and that's not okay. Um, but if that's not okay now, why is it okay to glorify Billy the Kid? Um, he has 20. He has 6 confirmed kills. They claim to have killed as many people as he had lived in years. Um, but for some reason, it's okay to glorify that. Um, I obviously don't think that that should be okay. Um, I think that we should be able to tell the story as a story and not have to demonize the person, but we also shouldn't glorify them. Um, but that's kind of a problem with myth, is that even me saying that um, Billy the Kid was a murderous asshole wouldn't have been at all um, controversial at his time. In fact, I'm pretty sure the kid would have actually agreed. but um, the but the mythology surrounding him has grown so much that it makes it hard to talk about the real deal. And part of that is exactly glorifying killers. So So Zoro asks, why did the U.S. have the first Red Scare? Well, because the USSR had just come onto the scene, and everybody was freaking the heck out. and Wilson wasn't doing anything about it. the It was just a absolute shit show. I did an episode about it a long time ago. I think it's actually the first time that I mentioned hating Wilson. um, so let's see here. Um, Kane Yo-Yo asks, have you heard Alex Jones and his conspiracy about probably. I don't give a damn about the guy. Although, speaking of him though, um, I do take issue with YouTube removing him. At one point, I talked about him a little bit in my Vegas conspiracy theories episode. It was actually an academic paper that I presented at a conference. Um, but and I mentioned Jones by name in it. Um, and I actually complained that his videos were still monetized. That obviously dates the video quite a bit. Well, the speech itself, I think he had become demonetized by the time I produced the video. Um, but now he's been removed from the platform, and that's a step too far. I fiercely disagree with that. Um, he now gets to play martyr. Same thing with uh Sargon being removed from PayPal. Like now he gets to play martyr. It's like and you don't get to pick and choose who is a good and bad guy. Like as a company, they shouldn't be doing that. Um, you know, at least if they want to like say that they are unbiased. Um, especially if because he was barred because he said one bad word on a stream, and like I mean, the guy's a whack job for sure, but like I cannot abide by these big companies choosing who they like and who they don't just because of their politics. That's not good. That's like looks kind of dystopian. Um, so I just wanted to say that. Um, all right, so getting back to more history stuff, Neopangean asks, why do you think America had such a weird affection for Rome prior and during the Civil War? If you look at the flag of the Army of the Potomac, it is extremely Roman. Um, well, I mean, like, look at our capital. um, look at the look at the colonial style, and even it's been revived several times into neo-colonial style, where that standard like houses with pillars in front of it. You park your car next to Roman pillars. Um, eh, the reason why the U.S. has always had this affection with it is because um, classicists have a affection for Rome. It's seen as the last bastion um, of progress with civilization before the Dark Ages. Obviously, historians take issue with the term Dark Ages sometimes. I actually kind of like it, but I get the concern. But the the that's a very humanist perspective, is to see Rome as this like um, last bastion of civilization's progress. So basically, um, the reason why we see that Roman influence in design and callouts to Cicero and things like that all the time in Congress, even today. Um, I mean, like if you look at the floor of the Congress, there's fasces on either side of the pillars. Like there's literal fasces. The Roman symbol of the Senate. Um, that like senators would walk around with these bodyguards who had like bundles of sticks with the axe head at the top of it, and it was supposed to like be like this guy's important. Um, by the way, that's also where we get the term fascist, because that was the symbol of the fascist party in Italy. Um, so obviously, there's a lot of Roman influence everywhere. It's not just an American fascination. Um, you'll see it anywhere you see Roman style architecture. And yeah, it doesn't go away because that's kind of the Enlightenment in general is built off of this fascination with Rome. Um, so let's go back here. Um, Super Desmond asks if I'm an anarchist, and as I said before, no, I was a teenage anarchist, but I grew up. Let's see here. And by the way, guys, be for sure to put the at the cynical historian in front of it, so that I can tell when you're talking to each other or to me. You know. Um, so L. Wilhelm as have you seen the documentary The Creepy Life Line? And no. Um, so um, Varia Hodges says, what would you consider to constitute Western civilization? This this is actually an interesting question, because we have so much talk about like what is the West, um, and normally it's like, okay, well, the Greeks started it, then it went to Rome, then it went to France, then it went to England, and whatever is in that influential bubble in Europe is the West. But like, there's a lot of debate around it, and there is a great book called The Myth of Continents. Um, I don't remember who it's by. Sometimes I've actually used pictures from this book on the show. Um, Martin W. Lewis and Karen Wigan. I think that's how to say her name. But the whole idea is that our current ideas of continents are really weird. And they go over the historical development and how we have changed over time in our definitions. And that includes Western civilization. So we have a super chat that says from Cringe Sniper. That's a good name. The alt right is doomed. Its leaders per, permanent. Uh, okay. I Yeah, of course the alt right is doomed. It's a bunch of whack jobs, but um, you know. um, thanks for the super chat. Um, would you so Simus asks, would you consider an episode on the creation of the EU? Um, Not really my subject matter, to be honest. Um, there's a lot of things I don't um I try to stay within my niche, because unless they make a movie about it, otherwise I'm also just not really interested, to be honest. It's a long history, and it's a bunch of just kind of boring, you know, alliances for economics. It didn't really become that much of a political entity until about 30 years ago. Otherwise, it was just called the common market. You know, um, so kind of just a boring story, at least to me. Um, and David, I've I'm saying I grew out of it, out of anarchism. Not that anarchism is a bad thing, just that I did. Um, and Benjamin Harry asks if I will do more Sabaton videos. They're putting out an album soon, so I've been thinking about making an entire episode oriented around that album, just like telling what each song is about, and maybe doing a bit of review. But like mostly just like, hey, this song's about this. Um, but that has to come out. um, Mario Vega says, I'm finishing my application for grad school, and I wanted to ask you if you had any advice for a future grad student in history. Um, pick your institution wisely. Um, wherever you're going to apply, make sure that like there are historians there that fit your interests. Even if you don't know what exactly you're interested in, um, make sure that you're not applying to an institution that may not fit you because you're not going to get in. Um, they're always explicitly looking for people who fit their current faculty. Um, and that's part of the reason why I switched from American Small Wars to the American West. Is that like there's just not anyone looking for American Small Wars. So be sure to also cater your interests when you're applying. Now, in terms of advice for once you're in, um, you're going to have to be a lot more specific than that. Because the main thing is you're going to be reading a lot. A lot. There are there I read much more digitally than I read physically, and yet I've got 3 bookcases now. um so be prepared for that. That's my main thing that I can give as advice. Oh, and be prepared to write a lot as well. Like write over the summer. Keep a journal. Figure out something that you can make little essays or something along those lines. Um, my answer to that was this channel, being able to keep up doing this kind of stuff. I actually did it on a dare, but like it turned into like a way of keeping up my ability to write history. And now in grad school, I'm expected to write something like I just had to turn in over 50 pages of essays. Um, and throughout the semester, I wrote well over 100 pages. Um, so that's also why I don't do any work on the channel while during the semester because there's no way to do any work. You're working too hard on that stuff. Um, so hopefully that helps. Um, let's see here. Uh, I'm going to screw up. Oh wait. So Ginger Stoledge, sorry. Um, asks what are my thoughts on Austrian monarchy? Um, not really any. I don't really pay attention. Um, you know, plus they haven't really mattered since 1918. Um, let's see here. Zorro, I will say I do not like him. That's it. I'm not gonna spend any more time on that subject. Um, let's see here. What are my thoughts on the current president? Not good ones, I'll tell you that. um, let's see here. Kane Yo-Yo asks if I would ever do a guest feature on historical podcasts. I would love to. I've done some little things where like people wanted a statement from me, or they wanted a clip from me to use in their podcast. Um, the one a clip from a video or something like that. I've actually had a few of those. But yeah, I there's a lot of really good history podcasts out there. I'm not much of a podcast listener myself because if I'm listening to a podcast, I could easily be listening to a book. Um, and I'd much rather listen to a book um, than let's see here. David Dillon, I get better dares. Um, the dare was mostly because to start this channel was mostly because my friends were getting annoyed at me complaining about um, nothing like this existing. Um, even though I just didn't know much of YouTube at the time. Um, let's see here. Man, we've got somebody who's already trolling this live stream. Wonderful. Um, yeah, that gets deleted. Um, hold on a second. There we go. I had to report something. All right. Now, let's see here. Okay, I'm trying to read as many. These questions are asking like, what's my opinion on FDR, or what's my opinion on the monarchy of some place or anything like that. A lot of them, I don't really have an opinion. That's the point of nuance and ambiguity. Um, the point is to ambiguate your opinion. Um, and a part of that is to just simply not have an opinion. Um, you know, like for instance, what is my opinion on FDR? He's a president. He did some good things. He did some bad things. Like some definitively good, some definitively bad. Um, but there's more to um, knowing about something than having an opinion on it. Um, you know, what did he do? Not whether or not it was a good thing. That's what's important. Um, so Levy M asks, what do you plan on doing after grad school? So I want to be a professor. Uh, you know, but the problem is, especially for anybody thinking about um, the really, sorry, we have trolls. All right, so the uh, the the history profession is really impacted right now. There are way more PhDs than there are positions to fill. Um, most schools putting out a that are hiring a new faculty position are being inundated by applicants. You get like 100 to 300 applicants for any faculty position. So I don't exactly have my hopes up. um, it's Also, there's another problem is that a lot of schools, once they have somebody retire or die out of a position, um, they won't just replace that position. They will instead turn it into an adjunct position, which is basically like a part-time professor. So, for instance, my mom is an adjunct professor, and and she is constantly telling me of all the things that you could do. Don't do this. It sucks. and so one thing that is really nice is that I can always turn back to this channel. Um, if I have to go adjunct, um, I have another revenue stream through this, and I get to do what I like to do. Especially on here, I get to do whatever I want to do. You know, it's I don't have to meet I don't have to meet some tenure requirements where you have to have certain types of publications and everything. I just publish what I want. And that's really cool. So I will definitely continue this once I get my PhD. It's just yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to get an actual faculty position. Although there is an interesting subfield called public history that, because of this channel, I'm kind of uniquely qualified for. So we'll see. That will be a really interesting thing if I can get a position as. Um, J. McJacob says, I would love to have jousted with you in historiography. I do love making arguments. You can ask any of my cohort. Um, which, by the way, and he also mentions, or at the pub, um, like I'm probably going to be going to a brewery right after this. So if anybody is in Albuquerque and would like to go and get a beer after this, hit me up on social media. The links to my social media are in the description. Just say, hey, I want to go to Bosque or something, or Tractor, or Santa Fe. Any of those, I'd be fine. I'd just like drinking beer. In fact, I've been drinking a bit of whiskey already, pre-gaming it. Um, so Samuel Galen asks, what made you decide to join the military? um, School. Um, I was kind of pushed towards it by my dad because we couldn't pay for me going to school. I was not a good student at that point. I think my GPA from high school was like 2.4, something horrible. Um, I just wanted to get an architecture degree at that point, so it was like, well, then go. I got into UNLV through the skin of my teeth. Um, I mean, by the skin of my teeth, and we didn't have the money to pay for it. I didn't qualify for the Millennium Scholarship, which was a Nevada thing. Um, and so we were at a career fair thing, and there was the Army National Guard just sitting there, like, "Hey, we're ready." And so my dad pushed me towards it. I, you know, went through with it. It's a good way to pay for college, especially in Nevada if you're going through the National Guard, because they actually pay all your tuition and give you GI Bill. So really useful. I don't get GI Bill anymore, by the way. I have to rely on my graduate assistantship to pay for my school. Because I ran out of GI Bill. Let's see here. Well, Alexandros, if you ever do come down to Albuquerque, let me know. um, so Brian Loring asks, who would you consider to be your favorite author of fiction? Um, and I'd say, hmm, that's a difficult question. The because I do really like a lot of science fiction, and I really my favorite science fiction book is Speaker for the Dead, but the author is repugnant. so I, um, but in terms of fiction, um, well, there's Isaac Asimov who wrote the Foundation trilogy. Actually, it's a series beyond that. I've never actually read past the first three, but I have the first three in leatherbound. I really like Asimov's story. I also really like crud. There's another famous science fiction author who wrote like Rendezvous with Rama, uh, Childhood's End. Great, great books. Have for whatever his name is. But I think Asimov is my favorite, just because the Foundation trilogy is about psychohistorians who can tell the future by learning history and just calculating the future. I mean, every historian's dream, right? um, let's see here. And thank you, Judean People's Front. Um, the um, we t- of course, we don't like the Judean People's Front. We like the People's Front of Judea. um, but yeah, thank you. Let's see here. Um, that's an interesting question. God, I'm still gonna screw up your name. Gingerish, Dulwich is sorry. Asks, did your time in the military influence your non-interventionist beliefs or any political beliefs? Yes and yes. Um, you'll you'll find a lot of veterans are um, more pacifist than you would believe. Now we're a lot more practically pacifist. Like I don't think anyone in their right mind could say that we shouldn't have invaded Afghanistan after 9/11. Like saying otherwise to me is just denying reality. Um, and thank you, Alterac Barry. That does offset ad block. You can also go YouTube Premium. Um, but in terms of my non-interventionist beliefs, um, while part of it is definitely my experience as a veteran and having actually fought in an intervention, um, there's also just coming to the realization as I started studying it more and more of how often interventions simply are poorly thought out. Um, you know, when I was in in the military, like I thought Iraq was a good war, and now I don't. Um, but the it's Chidian People's Front calls me Splitter. it's it's front for the Judean people. but the it's complicated because also my opinions of this stuff formed over years and years and years. It's not like I um came back from Afghanistan and instantly went like, we need to stop doing that. That's bad. It takes some time to kind of digest. Um, and yeah, it's weird. So I can't really say that it directly affected my um decisions on that. Um, okay, so the person who asked this question actually gave me a pronunciation that I can kind of sound out. So Yinzi Yinzi do Dulage. Oh, I'm sure that's still really bad. Yinzi Duluish. Um, I'm guessing that's Polish. It looks or something Eastern European. Um, the yeah, so I can't quite answer the question precisely because there's no because it formed slowly. All right, so Lion24 asks, how would you describe the history of American Canadian relations? Rocky. There you go. It kind of inaugurated it with us trying to invade Canada and failing, and then a quarter century later, trying and failing again. And then there were filibuster attempts on both sides. Canadians tend to forget that, like, you tried to invade us too, and failed on several occasions. Um, Especially the Great Lakes. Like, how did you lose on the Great Lakes in 1812? Like that's just like you had all the power and you still lost to a bunch of guys in rafts. Come on. But like um the but after 1812 I mean after every war really we've kind of always come back around to the British, and at that point it was Canada was the British, and you know, while we had like the hunter lodges that supported um various rebellions in Canada, um you know, that was just like individuals acting as filibusters, and the US remained very supportive of Canada. So it's always been this kind of rocky relationship as with any kind of international relationship, but ultimately favorably for Canada. Um, Come on. This thing's freezing on me a little bit. Let's see here. I have not read the War Nerds series on 1812, sorry. Um, do I have any opinions on the migration wave in Europe? It's a migration wave. um, you know, people need to flee from Syria. Um, what? Let's see. And retro, I've never heard anybody actually say that the U.S. doesn't have history. I've heard plenty of people try to say that the U.S. is really new and doesn't have a lot of history. I've heard that, but at the same time, in terms of continuous governance, we're actually an extremely old country. There's very few countries that have had continuous governance from 1776 onward. Um, Now, I would actually say 1788, when right after our ratification of our constitution. But even there, most countries have not had a single form of government since 1787. So we actually have quite a bit of history as compared to most countries. Um, Now, in terms of nationhood, that's a wholly different question. Nations are, you know, people who identify as a singular group, and I would say that the U.S. wouldn't really be defined as a nation until well into the 1860s, if not later. Um, But as a country with a single form of governance, um, yeah, that's we're actually one of the oldest countries on Earth. So there you go. Um, let's see here. Um, Line 24, you've asked that a couple times, and no, I haven't seen the miniseries Kennedys. Um, let's see here. Levy M asks if history memes will have an impact on the way we study history. No. The way we study history is way too ingrained for some silly thing like the internet to affect it. Fact is, we are um, it's a difficult profession to turn. We've had we've had a significant change over since World War II with the rise of revisionism, but it's been a slow change. I mean, we're talking decades and decades and decades, and there's hardly anything to shift it. It's much like we were talking about earlier in the stream. Like the army, it's really hard to turn around. Particular doctrine is going to be adhered to for decades. Um, and and especially with the history profession, that doctrine has been developed and as a through a bunch of thinkers arguing about it for well over a century. So the historical method really isn't going to be affected by memes or anything along those lines. Um, let's see here. Um, so Neopingian says, "Will I see They Shall Not Grow Old?" And I actually already have seen it. Um, it's like the colorization is fantastic. Um, I don't know about if I like because they use a lot of Foley effects, which Foley is like making the sound effects for stuff off screen. Like if you didn't record somebody dropping their phone, but you did record it in video, then you might actually like take a phone, put a mic on the floor, and then drop it right next to the mic, and there you got your sounds. So they did a lot of that with "You Shall Not Grow Old," and to me it's really weird because they're trying to like lip read sometimes, and sometimes they're also like the way that they make tank tracks sound just whatever they were using to record was not good. Um, but the colorization, man, that is fantastic. Um, but I also have to say the narration is boring. I I don't like the narration at all. Um, and then you ask again, have I seen the Medal of Honor series on Netflix? And I didn't know it was out yet, so definitely keeping a tab open on that. Uh, I wait, 2005. What? Okay, no, that's a different Medal of Honor. Um, so it's a documentary, not based on a true story though, apparently. But I'll probably end up watching it eventually. Um, let's see here. So on the meme question that said before, uh, he rephrased it so that he's saying like, will memes affect the way that the public perceives history. Um, and yeah, definitely. It's already happening quite a bit. I mean, think about all of the think about how many myths are perpetrated by people who they'll put a picture of like General Grant next to General Lee, and it'll be like, you know, here are the facts. General Grant was a slave owner. Lee wasn't, and it's like, well, you're wrong right off the bat. Like Lee was a slave owner. He inherited slaves just like Grant did, and he didn't free them until 1864, which you might notice is, you know, when the 13th Amendment was just about to be passed. the so yeah, um, but the and Grant did the same thing. Yeah, but that doesn't. The way these memes try to make arguments about history are so basic and infantile that like it shouldn't matter to the public, but unfortunately it does. Um, instead of like paying attention to like what actual historians are saying, they're going to look at like, well, I saw it in a movie, and it's just, you know, how many times do I have to review a movie and show how badly Hollywood messes up narratives before people realize that they can't trust that kind of thing? And the same thing is going to happen with, it is happening with memes, is that they will continue to just be idiots. Um, but there's also just like some fun ones that I often use memes on my channel. I mean, sometimes they can make things fun. Um, let's see here. Rob Rob oh, Womack asks, "Have I seen Oh What a Lovely War?" Bits and pieces of it. You can find scenes from it on YouTube, but I have never gotten a good copy of it, so I haven't seen the whole thing. Um, let's see here. And what time is it? Okay, so we have about half an hour before I want to wrap this up. So let's see what other questions we've got. Um, Remember to put the at cynical historian, the cynical historian, in front of the question, so I can make sure that I'm not entering somebody else's conversation, because there's some chat going on. Um, so Benless asks, what movies am I looking forward to? And I don't exactly pay attention to what's going to be released. Most of the time, it's like things come as a surprise. But one thing that I've heard of is that Castle Itter is being made into a movie, and like this is a the battle for Castle Itter is like um yeah, it's called The Last Battle. Um, it doesn't have a release date apparently. But um, it's this crazy battle that like German soldiers teamed up with American POWs, some British POWs, and like some French resistance fighters to fight the SS during a siege at a castle in like southern Germany, or Austria. Okay. Um, and it was one of the last battles of World War II, and it's literally Germans fighting alongside Americans against Germans. It's great. It I'm surprised it has not been made into a movie yet. Um, so it will eventually. be turned into a movie, and I do look forward to that. Um, but otherwise, I could say there's some movies I'm looking forward to watching that I already have. Um, but I just have to do before I watch a historical movie, I have to research it beforehand. So, for instance, I'm currently going over the book Black Klansman. I'm really looking forward to that because it is just a weird story, and I just wanted to see how good the movie is. Um, there's also the Outlaw King. There's an episode from Shadiversity. Um, aptly named because his first name's Shad. So Shadiversity did a review of it, and he's like a big medieval warfare buff. He's really concerned about like the equipment and you know and castles. Like, oh man, you get him started on castles. But so he did a review of it, and it sounds really cool. I just haven't. I'm not a medievalist, so when it comes to getting into something like medieval history, there's a lot of complication that I have to like research away, and it takes a long time for me to get ready to watch something like that. And thanks again from the Judean People's Front. Um, so no, I haven't seen Kursk. I believe that is a Russian movie. Um, let's see here. Neo Pangean asks if Rome didn't expand, would do I think that like Carthage or the Greeks would have taken its place? Yeah. That's the nature of empires, is to expand until they can't. Um, and anarcho fedgling. I don't know what a fedgling is. Um, asks, do I think that my distaste for Wilson is a meme? Yeah, by now it is. I mean, there's the whole thing of Wilson. I mean, like, I love doing it, but at the same time, that's totally a meme by now. um, let's see here. Um, did I see the Cold It series? I don't even know what that is. Um, yeah, I don't know what that is at all. Oh, it's some POW camp thing. Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about there. Um, so that's an interesting question. Grad Yerev asks, was the American libertarian movement emerging in the 1970s an adaptation of Southern opposition to the federal government to stay relevant after the success of the civil rights movement? And I would say no. Um, uh, the the libertarian movement is it has its own discrete history that is definitely not Southern since it originates in California. Um, but uh, California is a weird place, though. um, but it's more about the I don't like the government coming and telling me what I can do. It's not about states' rights, which is always a cover for frickin' either a cover for slavery for advocating slavery or a cover for advocating segregation. Um, you know, the the most the most pro states' rights speech of the 1960s also includes the famous um, segregation now, segregation then, segregation now, and segregation forever. It was always a cover for something else. Um, so what libertarians are arguing for is you know I I don't like the government putting chemicals in the water. But in reality, they're actually arguing that they want less government, um, and wherever possible, that less bloat, less as little as possible, make it as lean and mean as it can get. Um, and that's very much not an outcrop of the civil rights movement. Um, And Sir Reginald Meowington asks, "Would I appreciate memes being made by the fan base?" And there's already a few. um, David Dillon, he's here. He's actually made a few. And same with Punksci or Punkshi. Um, the I'm just gonna call you Punk Gramsci because it's funny. But they there's yeah, I've put David Dillon's stuff on a couple of episodes actually. He's done the kind of like cartoon version of me where then it says like Wilson, um, and like I love that stuff. I keep everyone I find, even the ones like there was a bunch of things going around saying that I was a Nazi communist, which is just like what the hell is that? And somebody, I don't remember who I always save the name of it, but like somebody put the symbol on a jet fighter that has like the swastika and the hammer and sickle in the center. And it's like, cool, I like it. um, let's see. And David Dillon also, somebody was calling me a historian LARPer, LARPing as a historian, and so he photoshopped my head on like this fat LARPer. That's great. Um, who do you think? So Nolan Hansen says, who do you consider to be the most forgotten U.S. president? Um, Garfield. Probably, I said earlier. I think Garfield's my favorite because he lasted for just I think it was like 3 months or something like that, and then was assassinated. But he had this last. He was elected, um, campaigning that he would end the spoils system, and he really did put in motion the end of the spoils system. So for such a short period of time, he was extraordinarily effective, and I wish people would know more about him because, like, yeah, that's just cool. And he died because he didn't give he was killed by a disgruntled somebody who had like voted for him and given contributions and all that and expected to be given a position in the government, and but he was campaigning against the spoils system, so he was killed because of what he was fighting against, and that's just magnificent. Like, people should know more about Garfield. um Apparently, Google is trying to censor anytime you guys say Nazi, by the way. Um, even though we were talking about it as a joke. Frickin' Google. Um, and Earl Dog asks, did I ever say you think Wilson is worse than Buchanan? Yes, I definitely do. I think Buchanan wasn't exactly a good president, but he was thrown into a disintegrating country, and he was doing the best he could. I think we blame him for way too much. Um, you know, he was just dealt a bad hand. Um, plus, real like secession only started after Lincoln was elected. He wasn't inaugurated yet, but South Carolina seceded in December 28th of 1860. Um, you know, the elections were held long before that. Like 2 months before that. So they had enough time to go to realize that their guy lost, and they were like, "No, I don't, I don't like the U.S. anymore. Um, they're not gonna let us send slaves west." Wah. And so they frickin' took their toys and went home. uh, we get to make fun of South Carolina for that, right? um, let's see here. And we've got about 15 minutes left, guys. So Varia Hodges asks, what do you think would have happened if Wilson had never become a historian or the president? Um, I mean, his ideology that he infused into U.S. interventionism would eventually, like, I mean, it's too potent of an ideology to not exist, not have somebody else come along. But the fact is, he was the one who came along. Um, you know, somebody would have segregated the federal government if it wasn't for him. Somebody would have done all the bad things he did if it wasn't him. I think that it probably wouldn't have all happened with one person. that's that's pretty weird. The amount of things that he went out of his way to cause harm. But um it's also he was just acting on a complete um on a completely weird ideology. It's self-contradictory at points. Every historian has to complain about that. But like it's um yeah, it's I think that somebody else would have come along. Um and Mr. Beat says, congrats on surviving the semester. Hey man. Um and thanks. It's been a hell of a run. Congrats on finishing up your semester too. Well, I don't know if you're done yet. Um so let's see here. Um got about 13 minutes left, guys, so let's find another question. Um who was so Retro asks, who was the second best president? And um second best, I mean, once again, I don't really have a best. Like, the conventional answer is Abraham Lincoln, but I like Garfield, I like Coolidge. Um, I like uh, I like presidents who didn't do anything. That's my thing. Like a good president and who is one who just kind of skates by, doesn't do anything bad, doesn't do anything good. Um, you know, just doing their job is good. You very rarely see that. Just plain competent presidents. Um, I also just like Teddy. Teddy's just a fun character, but he is an imperialist, so yeah. Um, he also was a primary influence on Frederick Jackson Turner because one interesting thing about Teddy is that he was also a historian. He's a pop historian, but he was a historian nonetheless. Um, he literally wrote a series called Why the West Was Won or something like that. um, and Noah asks, if I could, would I put graphic images in the videos? And oftentimes I do. I've shown a number. Definitely shown a lot of dead bodies on the show. Um, you know, to me, if it is shocking to the viewer, but you are talking about it, then that just adds to the meaning of the message. Um, if you're trying to like, you'll see people who show like dead bodies and that, but then they'll like put a black screen over the eyes or something like that. Try to mask it in just a little bit of a way. But to me, that's actually drawing attention to it more than you should. Um, it's a problem. And thank you, Judean People's Front, again. Uh, I'll be sure to get a beer after this. um, the cheers. But it's weird because I have to decide on whether YouTube's going to demonetize it versus just like sticking to my guns. Um, you know, like there are some times where I've decided like, nope, I'm not showing that. Like for instance on the Waco thing, there's footage of like tanks possibly running over people, and like I actually was kind of talking about that. That is actually that image that I'm like, I'm not showing this because it's too gruesome. Um, but I'm perfectly fine in that episode showing, you know, the fire. You know, there's definitely people dying there. Um, heck, I think yeah, I actually made a joke at one point with that footage. Like, so obviously I'm not averse to using nasty imagery, especially if it enhances the message. That's the main point. But you also have to decide when is it going to um, be too far. Uh, so Sir Reginald Meowington asked, "What's my favorite brand of liquor?" And that would be Grangestone for single malt, and um, Winchester Rye for I'm always looking for what's the best bang for your buck, right? So Winchester Rye just nails the pin on the head when it comes to quality versus price. Um, and okay, so here's an Earl Dog. It's a it's a possibility that tanks did run over dead bodies, not freaking living people. Um, but it's disputed. A lot of stuff around Waco is disputed. Um, in fact, I try to emphasize that in the episode. Um, so and the footage is grainy as all heck, but either way, I'm not going to show that kind of footage. Um, shut up, Hector. Hector's a friend. So let's see here. You know full well I didn't vote for Trump, fool. Anyways, the somebody I'm trying to find who asked it, and it's a good ending question. Somebody asked, "What are my what's the upcoming content that I'm planning?" Because right now is the time that I'm starting to put everything together. I'm going to be going to Vegas in a few days, and immediately going to Reno. And the idea is that I'm going to have a bunch of stuff to work on over the break. And so I could tell you right now, I do have plenty of stuff ready to go. For instance, next week it will be 1517 to Paris. But I'm going to be doing a lot more documentary stuff than based on true stories, at least right now. Well, looking at, I keep a list of what. In fact, I think I can just share it. Hold on. So I keep a list of stuff that I'm planning, and you can see here that you know I have stuff recorded, I have stuff ready to go, I have um, a lot of plans on stuff. Some things are going to definitely be controversial. Because you know how the internet is when it comes to subjects like these. But it's I still have I have a lot of stuff to work on. In fact, there's one in here that I'm not showing because it is technically a secret, and other history people will know what I'm talking about. Other history channels will know what I'm talking about. But um, you can see here, there's a lot going on. Um, you know, this is actually this week's, but yeah. So a lot of plans, and I'm also dealing with a lot of stuff that I haven't watched yet. And somebody asked earlier, another thing that I'm really looking forward to seeing is First Man. That looks like a really fun movie. Um, so yeah, I'm going to be doing that. Hold on, there we go. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff I've got planned. Need to do a lot of writing. Need to do a lot of recording. Need to do a lot of editing. Um, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of how much I'm working on this stuff. Um, and Hector asks, what was the last tribe the American Army eradicated? American Army never eradicated a tribe. What was the last tribe they fought? The Utes. And that was in like 1921, called the Posey War. It actually wasn't the American Army, but it was just local um, sheriffs in that. But you know, it is called the Posey War. Uh, so we are. Uh-huh. Judean People's Front. You're saying that First Man is not a good one? I Everybody seems to be saying that it's really good, but I'll have to see it and find out. So I'm going. So we're running out of time now, so I'm going to stop here. Um, the the If anybody wants to join me at a brewery in let's say Bosque. If anybody wants to join me at Bosque in Albuquerque, I'm going to be going there in, let's say, an hour. And so hit me up on social media. The links are in the description. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week with another episode. It'll be 1517 to Paris. All right. Bye, everyone. If I can find the button.